Good morning. You'll be seeing this on the 22nd of January because that is the date that everybody commemorates a decision that's no longer in force, Roe versus Wade. For some reason, people march about this and mobilize, even though Dobbs has vitiated it. So let's talk about it. Roe versus Wade, or abortion, in terms of rights. Because people talk about a right to life, talk about privileges too. So, first of all, a right to life. Okay, who's got? Do the unborn lack the same rights as others of life? No, they don't. No. Uh, the right to life is the right not to be have your life taken by the state without due process. And because you didn't commit a crime, you shouldn't be executed. So it's only a right against the state. Do the unborn have that right against the state? Yes, they do. No state executes pregnant women, which is entirely the right to life, not to be executed. When they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to life is the right not to be killed by the state, or or tortured or whatever. Actually, that's the Eighth Amendment right against unusual punishment. So, torture by the state. So, the whole calling it a right to life, that's not really a thing. Their right to life is the same. There's also the right to have damages against violent crime against them. That right is also secured. There's in the law, the Unborn Victims of Violence Act fully gives the unborn the same right to vengeance against somebody who would harm their mother. So they are equal to their mothers, not superior, but equal under this right. In fact, there's a federal right to there was a federal right to abortion, which should actually be litigated because it says in the text of the Unborn Victims of Violence Act that abortion is still preserved. So it should be litigated. See if that recognition in that recognition provided women with the right to abortion. Now, it would be an interesting case because that was officially recognized. So, there were people who used to argue that because of the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, that right to protection assured a right against an equal right for fetuses with their mothers. Therefore, they have rights to personhood, except that the law actually exempted abortion specifically as a from the act. So, so that's the right to life. Is not being murdered a right or a privilege? It's a privilege. Or a right of vengeance, which is a privilege. So, it's a right of vengeance against the people. There's two people you can have vengeance against: the mother who ordered, or family member who ordered the abortion. By ordered, I mean paid for, not told somebody to have it, although we'll get back to that. As they say now, stick a pin in it. And and the right to punish those who provide the abortion to the mother. So that's the right of vengeance. In other words, it's the those who seek to ban abortion, or such people, seek a ban to control doctors, to prevent doctors from having the right of immunity, the immunity against prosecution and investigation, both from having for obstetricians and other abortion providers to not be investigated or prosecuted by the state for performing abortions. It's twofold. One is the right, the immunity to actually provide abortions in either case, the case of miscarriage and the case of terminating a doomed pregnancy and terminating a non-doomed pregnancy. And I know people don't like to use the word doom, but doom is the correct term. A child is doomed if he's not going to live through the natural course. And the problem is you don't know if a child is doomed until after a certain point where people are uncomfortable with the abortion method. So are children uncomfortable with it? That all depends. That's an issue that people have, though, because later abortion methods, well, any abortion method, tends to excite receptors against pain. They react to it. And it's a legitimate concern, even to have your heart stopped by sodium pentothal hurts. It's a pain in the chest. It's agony for a brief moment. And if you're a person who believes in near-death experiences, the agonies exist, but then it's quickly followed by the peace and love of death, which means the actual person who is killed, that's release. To be killed is to be released from pain and to be enveloped in the love of God. And if you believe in God, you have to believe that, especially for the unborn. And really, the science of death is that, it's the people who actually look at stories of people who have died and come back, universally it's a good experience. Even those people who talk about hell, those who talk about it very often say, when I called out to God, I was for mercy, it was granted universally. Nobody stays in hell. It is purgatory. There is no hell. It's purgatory. It's a self-inflicted purgatory. So, as far as being dead, it's, nobody's mind is being dead. It's a release from the sufferings of life and the binding of the soul, of the soul to a physical form. People want to experience the physical form because you don't have the same kind of pleasures in death as you have in life. In heaven there is no beer. That's why they drink it here. So, yeah. So that's life. Now, there's liberty. Who's got a liberty interest? Well, there's a liberty. The women have a liberty interest in having the ability to procure an abortion. to make that cleaner and clearer as far as the state goes, they want and currently have the ability not to. Well, no, they don't have they want the ability to one be able to have that the medical professional available, and two, to not be invested, to not have to participate in the state in if an abortion occurs, to be answerable for it, and that includes having a therapeutic abortion, an abortion where one has had a failed pregnancy or a pregnancy which is doomed because of genetic problems, eliminated by surgical procedures. And they, and again, there's the pain problem. Now, the pain problem can be taken care of by saying that abortions after a certain point must be induced birth. And that actually, if you want a solution to abortion, it is giving, allowing children to be born early, because nobody has a right to not be born. There's no such right. I don't want to be born. Yeah, you don't have that right. And in fact, it's a privilege to be born early, again, because you go to heaven, and two, because you don't have to suffer a life with a birth defect. So but society has an opinion about whether abortion methods in the late term that cause pain should be allowed. It's a good question, and most people would say no. They shouldn't be allowed. So allow them then. We'll take you up on the offer. We'll say, okay. And that's probably the thing. And then there's the question of power. We'll get to that. We'll put a pin in that one too. By the way, I'm gonna keep going after the usual 50 minutes and see if they'll let me, if the app will let me post the whole thing. So that's the question of rights and privileges. Now the doctors want the right, don't want to be investigated, or have having their physical liberty damaged by actual jail time, or having their reputations as doctors curtailed because they've lost their medical license if they provide abortions. And frankly, if medical society has already said that procuring an abortion does not in any cases affect a medical license or the ability to have insurance, then abortion bans are basically vitiated. That's another solution. If all medical societies said, no, we will not take away a person's right to practice medicine or privilege of practicing medicine from anybody who procures an abortion, and then of course that leaves open the question of shady abortion providers, medical students, nurses, etc. Or doctors who've lost their licenses anyway to procure abortions, but that's already a thing. You can't do that now. You can't, you couldn't do that before Roe. You can't provide an abortion without license. So, and there are people in medical societies who don't want a license given against doctors, but they usually don't push the issue. And some do, actually. There are moralist doctors who don't want abortionists within their ranks because they have a thing about not taking life, even if taking life is medically necessary. That's just a failure of imagination by doctors, because you know, performing procedures that risk life are part of the job, especially if you're a surgeon. Especially if you're an obstetrician, there's a chance if if you try to have somebody assist in a birth, that just from defects in the uterus or complications in the pregnancy, that the woman will die, or that the child will die, or that if you're giving chemo, that the person will die before they and you inflict pain on them while you're trying to prevent their death or seek a cure. Usually it's to prevent the death for a certain time. It's even if it's like late stage cancer, it's just providing excess time. And there are people in society who don't want who want doctors to do everything to preserve life. And it's like no. That's torture. Withholding chemo is it's a good thing if the person doesn't want to suffer for the remainder of their life or for any part of their life for a day to get a month, essentially. You get a couple of days of chemo, you'll survive a couple of months. You can die more slowly. Or you can live comfortably for 6 months and then die anyway at the end of it. That's I think we've covered the waterfront. No, we haven't. There's one particular thing. 2 things. The dirty side of the 3 things. There's viability, first of all. And this is where the ACLU / the National Center for Abortion Rights or Reproductive Rights dropped the ball, because they didn't, in the brief or in the arguments before the court on Dobbs, define why viability is a thing. Viability is a thing because it sets up a public policy line, but also a real line on power that states that if somebody has the right to be born, then they have a right not to be aborted, which means they have a right of vengeance against their mother, possibly, and their doctor, assuredly, to have prosecution occur. And before viability, they don't have such a right. After viability, they do, because viability means that a person essentially can be born and have the full citizenship rights of someone who is born as a resident of the United States and as a citizen, if they were to be born in the United States. But even then, yeah. So, because if you can be born, you are a citizen. Once you are viable, you have citizenship rights. So it's not recognized, but it's logical, and it's an argument that could be made. So if you reside in the United States as a fetus, you have the full rights to citizenship. Sorry to those who are anti-immigrant, and of course have the right to travel too. People have a right to travel, so you can be taken to the United States and then claim that right to be born here implicitly. The problem is that they didn't. That allows for the Congress of the United States, who has the power under the 14th Amendment to define its terms, to say that there's a difference there, that because the Congress has a right to define when the line is drawn. Right now it's drawn based on necessity, and of course they should have said that, explained it. The problem is that if you cited viability, then you'd say 14th Amendment, and 14th Amendment means that Congress has the right to make the line, which means Congress not only has the right to make the line at viability, they also have the power to make the line before viability. They can give, the Congress of the United States is in providing for the start of life, can actually put it anywhere they want. They have that power. So they can put it at 15 weeks of pregnancy. They can put it at conception, although that's ridiculous because for biological purposes, until gastrulation, you're not organized enough to be a sync of rights. You're a set of stem cells in a chorion, and which cell is the real one? That's not a thing. You're a sack of stem cells, which can exist anywhere, and you have them in your body. And each stem cell in my body does not have the right to life. It's a cell. Collectively, they don't have a right to life until they're organized into a person. That's gastrulation. It's 2 weeks. So these attempts to regulate birth control are just totally wrong, philosophically. Medically, they're wrong because you can't be a sync of rights if you're not organized as a person, because that organization ends at death, or is at least suspended at death. It can be restarted. That's an interesting question too. But until it is started, the chemical and electrical process that is life, because ensoulment is not a question that can be addressed in law. The materialistic soul, though, is the thing you can define, and that materialistic soul starts at gastrulation. That's not even a question. That's if you looked at materialistic souls, the answer is gastrulation. It's just not even. Anybody who doesn't say so is incompetent to practice medicine or to practice ethics, because they're ignoring methods. They're doing something besides fact. They're acting on belief if they say anything different. And if saying it's God's right. No, God doesn't have rights. Really, a God who needs rights isn't God. So yeah, this whole right of God thing in euthanasia and abortion, it's not a thing. God only has love. Does not have vengeance, does not have justice. Justice is from justification, meaning giving a reason. God does not need reasons to act as God does. So yeah, there's no such thing as that kind of right for God. So not even a privilege of God. God that's below God's pay grade. So, you actually decide when you're going to die and when you're going to stay dead. Usually God's very convincing. And if you're for near-death experiencers, very convincing to say, oh, no, you agreed to do this. You're going back. So, yeah. He has a right to... He does make people... keep with their mission, but ultimately you have a free choice. You had a free choice to come. So yeah. So yeah, it's what the reason that the ACLU / National Center for Abortion Rights did not argue viability was because it gave Congress power. Now, by doing so, it stopped state power, or would have stopped state power. It did stop state power. It took because it was the 14th Amendment, it took the power away from states. This is where we go from a discussion of rights and privileges and immunities to power. Should states have the power to regulate abortion? And the answer is no, because a right to not be born. That's defined by the Congress of the United States and only the Congress of the United States. So, in the Constitution. But because they didn't recognize that, or because they didn't want that recognized, viability was not explained. Because that vitiates a right to abortion by mothers. This is why they either have to wait until a couple of justices die or change their minds to bring a suit to reconsider Roe. Basically waiting for Alito to die or retire. And sadly, people who would have been appointed by Kennedy didn't have the spine to do what Kennedy would have done and say, no, it's not a right, or it's not a power that states should have. They didn't do their argument based on that, and I didn't have the ability to file an amicus brief because I'm not a lawyer and didn't have the funding to get a lawyer, or probably not even, may or may not have had permission to do it, and that all costs money. So I only had my voice to add, and of course the power dynamic. Thomas in his concurrence laid that out, that all of these 14th Amendment powers are suspect by under Dobbs. So far, Alito tried to say magic words to say that wasn't the case. To be continued. So, continue with power. This is states want power, but certain states want power. All states want power. So, with the power to restrict abortion is the power to allow abortion up until even birth, not even just the right to be born. So, it's most people don't want states to have that power to end a pregnancy prior to viability, but sometimes that's even necessary. Although even most mothers will, it's the ability to put the rights of the mother again superior to the rights of the child. So if take the child if you need to, even though it's viable, is basically that's the save the right, or even to protect the health of the mother. That's the farthest you can go in abortion rights. So meant to medically take to end the child's life, and usually doctors will perform a C-section, and doctors should, again, there's no right to be born, or to not be born. So it's doctors should have the power to induce labor at any point, vis-a-vis the child anyway. So, and doctors should never be, when you think about it, should doctors ever be prohibited by the state? Here's the thing: some doctors won't provide therapeutic abortions if they're going to be investigated. They don't want the regular inspections by prosecutors or police and on their records to make sure that all therapeutic abortions were needed, because that's essentially what they're allowing to happen. If to hold a medical license, you have to let some Republican prosecutor or Republican policeman go in and look at your medical records and investigate you, just in case you actually performed an abortion which was outside the number of weeks of gestation, or challenging, whether that limit had happened, and should they have reasonably known that gestation had occurred before they thought necessary or estimated, often to not birth a monster that would have killed the mother on the way out, or just been doomed and made the mother wait through and have a miscarriage anyway, and have the risk of miscarriage. This is the health of the mother part. The longer you wait to end a pregnancy, the riskier it is for the mother. because it's harder on the mother to push out. And the thought of pushing out a dead baby is not what people, that's like, it's a horrible experience. So, so I pushed it out, it's dead. Yeah, it's a non-live birth. That's actually part of a birth certificate. If you are born and not alive, there's a certificate for that. Certificate of live birth, and of course, it's a matter of public record. If a viable infant is, if birth happens, there's a record for that. So the right to privacy is definitely is a thing for doctors more than as much as for mothers. So what's the practical part of it? Abortion's a wedge issue. That means it attracts people who want all kinds of nasty things to be the power of the legislature that aren't covered, that are beyond abortion, such things as regulating sexuality in all its forms. Not just public homosexuality, but private homosexuality. They want that right to do that. They don't want the federal government to tell them, no, they can't do that. They want to say it. It's a right of the Catholic Church, and churches especially, to have an influence in the moral legislation of the state, because they have enough power as individuals and as organizations to affect elections. It's tremendous power. If you can mobilize, religions have the power to get the Black Church was a major player in civil rights, just as the Catholic Church is a major player in denying abortion rights, or attempting to. So yeah, churches are powerful. They're huge bases of people that can mobilize. Now the fleeing of churches post-pandemic, fleeing of people from churches post-pandemic has just obliterated on both sides that power of the church. The freedom of the church is what they call it. Now, when you're going about church power, there's also I've been reading Mill lately, or listening to Mill. Should the church have the power to regulate its employees to not have the choice of birth control or getting married because you happen to be gay? The church would say yes. It's a freedom of the church issue. The court should say no, because that gives the church a power over its employees that they should not have, which is a power greater than the society gives the right of people in the society to equal treatment, based on to marry and to marry who they want to marry. An employer should not have that right, whether the employee is a minister or not. Just because that's a matter of power, not religious freedom. Yes, religions have the power to say who their minister, if somebody's in ministry, but that doesn't mean that they should have the power over ministers to behave a certain way, and employees who are not ministers, or who are hired regardless of their religious preference. If somebody's a teacher, they don't have to be Catholic. And even if they're Catholic, they don't have to necessarily obey the church. Can the church force obedience on its members? The power of the church. So, I guess you can answer that the way you believe, but I believe they should not have that power. That, in the reasons of it, that the court has decided wrongly in Hobby Lobby, that although, and there's another course, the Little Sisters of the Poor, they had to make a deal on that they didn't want to make on funding birth control under the Affordable Care Act, and that hasn't changed. They had to actually agree with the insurance company on the merits, and they did not want that agreement. They wanted their power to not have to agree to anything, to impose. Again, it's the freedom of the church, the power of the church. It's not the freedom of the church, it's the power of the church. It's the principle. So it's about power. And the Republican Party wants the power to dominate the agenda because it attracts people to the Republican side. It actually attracts people to the Democratic side too. So it's, the question is, where is your constituency? The Republicans want the power to lock up voting blocks and have their 29 states. It's backfired on them because those religious voters ain't showing up anymore to church. A lot of them have not. So, when the obligation to go to church is not an obligation, if they can say, oh no, we say it's not an obligation, which means it's not a sin to not go. When people realize that meant there's no pain of sin to not go to church on Sunday, they stop going. If it's a totally voluntary thing, then, I've barely been in a church, and I like going to church, but I also like sleeping on Sunday because I, I'm up at night, and it takes medication to put me down enough to wake up in the morning. And then if I'm taking the wrong medication, I'm groggy. So it's a medical issue for me. Because there are medical problems that make getting up in the morning an impossible task. Though lately I've been sleeping earlier so I can actually make it to a 12:30 mass. You can tell because I started this. Well, you can't tell. You can tell by the sun, I guess, but my clock says 12:46, and there's 37 minutes already into the video. So, and we'll see again if this video sees the light of day as this video, or if I have to divide it into life and privilege. So, we've looked at the power of the parties, the power of the doctors. There's one more power dynamic we haven't talked about. And this is where the right to abortion hits the road. Guess what it is? I haven't mentioned it yet, but you can guess. Power of men. This is why it's a women's rights issue. Because the power to seek vengeance isn't just the power of women to seek vengeance or the unborn to seek vengeance. It's the power of the father to seek vengeance. Vengeance against the doctor who performed the abortion. Vengeance against the mother who had the abortion. It is power. It's the right of the father to regulate the conduct of the mother. And that is why it's a human rights issue and a right to abortion issue. It's to say blatantly that men should not have the right to martial law, and conservatives shouldn't have the right to martial law that prevents women and to protect men from powerlessness regarding the abortion decision. This is why it's a sex right, not just a medical right. It's about power. The power of men to say, no, you cannot kill this child. It's mine. And your body's mine too while you're just, period. When I take you sexually, that what I put into you is mine. And you must not kill it. This is why a birth control thing is an issue. Because men don't want women to have the freedom to not have their child. pregnant silences for, well, irony, seen late, but still there. To use the word pregnant in this issue, but yeah, just that pause is like, let it sink in there. That it's the power of men to control women. So yes, this is a sexual rights issue. And we want to be complicit in it. Comment below. So is it a question of life, or is it a question of power, and whose? And that is the issue of why certain people march on the 22nd of January.